Hello there and welcome to the Wedding Photography Podcast with Taylor Jackson. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about a camera that I used for both the pre-production unit and now a final released version for a wedding day, the Nikon Z8 or Z8, depending on which country you live in. Also exciting news, we're hosting a conference at our home in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. Not at our home, but at a theater near our house. And if you live in the drivable area, or even we have people coming from California and Texas and New York, if you want to come to our conference, it's all about wedding photography. It's called Canada Photo Summit. You can find more information. I'll put a link in the show notes, but it is canadaphotosummit.ca. And if you're part of the YouTube space, you'll know some names that are coming here, which are John Branch IV, Eric Floberg, Sam Hurd, Nova Markina, my wife Lindsay Coulter, Christine Tremolay, and I will be speaking as well. It's all going to be about wedding photography, so come on through. It's going to be a good time. Like all conferences, conventions, if you've ever been to one, the in-class section is really only 50% of what goes on. It's the social aspects, hanging out with peers. To speak about conventions like WPPI that I've been going to since 2007, 2008, the massive benefit there is that you get to grow both a friend group that does the same thing that you do, because we're all on these little lonely islands of being solo entrepreneurs in this wedding photography space for the most part. What you get at a conference like this is you get friendships and you get to meet people from locally as well as all around the world. So grow your friendship circles and come hang out, have some food, have some learnings. That's all. Nikon Z8. I finally reframed my brain to say Z instead of Z. In Canada, we learn to say Z, but there's usually a lot more people from the US watching my videos, and I don't have a British or Australian accent, so it sounds weird if I say Z, and people get really angry about it for some reason. So now I say Z, and also because it's brand spec for Nikon USA. So I did a pre-production test of this in 2 wedding style environments, as well as a couple's photo shoot with an animal, a dog. And that dog was very nice, if you're wondering. Dog's name is Sloan. It was her birthday, which is pretty exciting. And the camera performed phenomenally well. I have been using the Nikon Z series since, I guess, the original Z6 when it came out. We actually did a show with Nikon that you can look it up on YouTube if you're interested, where we got to travel around the world with Nikon Z6, take some pictures, and it was probably the most well-produced thing we ever did. So go check that out. Watch the Iceland episode first if you're interested. It's like half photography show, or the Iceland episode's maybe not even half photography show. It's a lot about how Instagram kind of blew up tourism there. I know that in the photography space, we're kind of sick of hearing about Iceland, but it's only really been a tourism destination for like under 15 years. That maybe if you grew up in the UK, maybe it was a viable travel destination, but no one really from Canada or the US, or I don't know, maybe the rest of Europe. I didn't grow up in Europe, so I don't know what the situation was there, but for the most part, I would say that tourism really blew up in the past 15 years with Iceland. They went through the banking collapse. They led that. They were all up on screens, and everybody was like, oh, those are nice visuals. And then Instagram launched, and all of a sudden, it was very easy to share images. Their volcano blew up and grounded air traffic all over Europe. And again, people got to see Iceland on the news, and their economy kind of shifted. So prior to the financial thing, pretty much everybody was in the fishing industry. That was the dominant industry in Iceland. And then it moved to finance, of all things. And then when that kind of fell through and collapsed, they pretty much moved as an entire country into tourism. So if you wanted to go from Canada, there were $99 flights for a long time. Icelandair was heavily subsidizing the tourism to get people into Iceland and spend money on $20 beers. So it is an interesting story, I think, and then the rest of the season of the Nikon show is pretty good. That's all filmed and also shot in the Nikon Z6, the original. And I love all those images still. The image quality that comes off of Nikon cameras, I have always just been really, really happy with. Shooting a Nikon Z8 again at a real wedding day, Tim actually commented that he was shooting with me, and he commented that the files, like, you can tell that they're Nikon files, that there is a warmth to them, and I would almost say like just a pleasing quality overall. Especially I was shooting the Nikon 85mm f1.2 for most of the day, and the image that lens with any of the Nikon cameras, but specifically the Z8 and the Z9, I'm going to kind of use them interchangeably because they're both pretty much the same camera, just in different bodies. And the images that were coming off of the camera, I am just so happy with. Up on YouTube, I do have some screen records or some EVF records of the entire wedding day, as well as the behind the scenes. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more and seeing the camera in action, head on over there eventually. So the struggle for a long time with Nikon was the autofocus. The files are always amazing. The autofocus, especially in low light, was a bit challenging with the Z6 and the Z6 II even, or I guess the Z7s as well. And coming into the latest firmware with the Nikon Z9, or I guess even from initiation, the Z9 has been good in low light. But as of the latest firmware update, it's just become an absolutely incredible camera. It, I would say, punches so far above what you need from a camera for the most part, or at least what I need from a wedding photography camera. But you are kind of trapped into, so Nikon Z9, it's pretty expensive. It's the we'll call it the bigger brother of the Z8. And it's quite expensive. And if you're a wedding photographer, you're in the Nikon system, you're going to want that as a main camera, and you're going to want a second camera as well. And you're kind of trapped into paying maybe for 2 Z9s, which is really expensive. Now we have the Z8. And I was expecting that they were going to announce this and they were going to take out some really key pieces from the Z9. That they're going to be like, okay, it does everything that the Z9 does, but it's only 21 megapixels or something crazy like that. It's not. It's the exact same camera, I think, in a smaller body. And it's also a lot less expensive. So now as wedding photographers, you're able to buy 2 of these reasonably and shoot 2 of them. And I would say in terms of myself as a wedding photographer, I would be very, very, very happy with this camera. If you are watching the YouTube videos, you will notice that the autofocus looks a little bit more erratic. I think when you're looking at it on a large monitor, I feel like it feels more erratic than it actually is on the wedding day and through EVF and on the back of the screen. It feels a lot more controlled in that environment. And in terms of hit rate for autofocus, I'm going to call it 99%, maybe even above, that I shot way too many images on this wedding day. And pretty much all of them were in focus, or if it did miss, it was typically user error, or I didn't have it set up correctly in the case that, so there's a setting that you can basically tell the autofocus. So if something is going to be passing in between the subject that you're focusing on, so say for instance, I'm focused on a couple during cocktail hour and somebody walks in between myself and the couple, there is a setting in there that can basically tune it so that it's not going to quickly track focus to the closest object that's kind of in the center. And that is something that I didn't have set up because I didn't think I'd need it on a wedding day, but that did throw me off a couple times. So if you're a sports shooter, for sure, make sure that you kind of dial the setting to what you want. But for me as a wedding photographer, it wasn't really a problem at all. I used 3 batteries on the wedding day, and I shot at least double what I would usually shoot on a wedding day as well, which I think is maybe a product of the fact that it's a completely silent shutter. So the Nikon Z8 has no mechanical shutter. So there's no shutter noise. There's no physical feedback of a shutter moving. It is just you hit the button and nothing. Well, not nothing. You can set an audio signal if you want, so you can make a little shutter MP3 noise go off. Or you can have hash marks that are kind of around the frame. So every time you hit the shutter button, hash marks kind of on each of the sides of the frame will kind of pop up to identify that, yes, you are in fact taking an image, because it feels weird for the first little bit to just be taking photos and be like, I hope those are on the card. And then after using it for a little bit, you trust it completely. But it's just a bit of a weird mental thing to get through. What I discovered is that I just shot double the amount of images than I would usually shoot, which is nuts. So came home with way too many images, but all of them were, I was very, very happy with them. And that was through the entire wedding day, from getting ready all the way into dancing. I used aperture priority for a little bit, and I used it in a pretty challenging setting, kind of a getting ready side lit environment. And it was overexposing everything, and I could have fixed it with exposure comp, but instead I just switched to manual quickly. So I don't have much experience with the auto ISO or any of the automatic modes, but in terms of manual controls and seeing what you're taking on the screen and actually getting that when you come back to your camera, it is a very, very nice system to use. Outside in the hot sun and the bright sun, you can actually see the LCD, which is amazing. It is not a fully articulating LCD. It's a kind of a flip LCD, the same thing that would be on the Nikon Z9. And I think for a wedding day, I'm actually happiest with that. I will shoot pretty much my entire wedding day from the screen now. I think I don't even know if I shot a single image to the EVF the entire wedding day. That is a product of kind of 2020 when we had to wear masks, and if I was taking images, I'd be fogging up my viewfinder wearing a mask. So I just started using the screen and moved to mirrorless. The screen is the same thing going on in the EVF, so you're not kind of at the mercy of being forced to look through the optical viewfinder if you don't want to. I've discovered that my hit rate, or I guess the quality of my candid images throughout the day has skyrocketed with this new strategy, that by not being completely through the camera all the time, I'm able to just be a little bit more present, talk to people, and be a little bit more of a human being, while also taking sneaky pictures as well throughout the wedding day. And I found that this really helps me create some real moments, or capture some real moments that actually happened there on the day. So if you are still on the DSLR side of things and you're like, why should I go mirrorless? I think there's a number of reasons. I would say that the biggest one for me is the ease of use, that the eye autofocus and everything is just so good, and you can just shoot from the screen if you want. And that is definitely a big switch up from DSLR shooting through the viewfinder, maybe using one autofocus point all the time, to just all of a sudden having unlimited, or not unlimited, but full screen. Everything that's in the frame has an autofocus point on it, and it will identify people. One of the bigger changes that I think that I've noticed, I don't know if this is a conscious change, my Nikon Z6 and Z6 II, they had a very strong tendency to focus on whatever the closest object was. So for instance, a couple is walking down the aisle towards you. If there are people on the left and right side of the frame and they're closer to you, or even if there's a flower pot, it would usually pull focus to that flower pot, even if it was on the edges of the frame. Now that problem seems to be completely fixed. It has, I don't know if it's, again, intentional, but it seems to have kind of a center priority. So it kind of knows what you're trying to do in your composition, and it will help you focus on that, specifically when it comes to human beings. If there's a person or a couple in the middle, it's going to likely put focus on that, even if there is maybe a larger face off to the farther left or right side of the screen. So I would say that is maybe one of my happiest changes for autofocus, as well as just low light, that it just keeps going, that there's no issue as you get into lower light. There is a dedicated pipeline, so there's no blackout when you're taking images, which is also maybe the reason that I shot way too many images, because when you're taking the picture, there's no kind of like black quarter second or whatever that pops up on your screen, that it just keeps rolling. And there's a dedicated pipeline for the EVF and for the screen, and also for image capture, at least in the Z9. I'm assuming that would have also ported to the Z8 as well, because it's the same no blackout, which leads to almost a very relaxing experience taking images, which is pretty cool. It has 2 card slots, so it has a CF Express, whatever the inexpensive one. Let's see, I have one on my desk here. It doesn't even say what type of CF Express it is. Type A? Yeah, nope, Type B. CF Express Type B. So the inexpensive one's not the crazy expensive Sony, whatever, CF Express Type A's. I'm very, very happy with the performance from that card. The second card slot in this, so the Z9 is 2 of those. The Z8 is 1 of those, and also an SD card. So if you just have an SD card with you, you'll be fine. Slower SD card, I've found that even when you are really, I forget what the frame rate of this camera is. It's way too many frames per second than I would ever use. I turned it on 15 frames per second, I think, for the first kiss. And while I maxed my buffer immediately because I had the slowest card in there ever, because I had no idea that I was going to shoot this, it still allowed me to take images. Even though it was reading that there were 0 frames remaining in my buffer, I still have probably 45 or 50 frames while it was reading 0. So I don't know what happened there. That was obviously user error. I put a slow card in the SD slot. So slightly faster card in SD slot if you are going to be doing a lot of images very quickly. But I would say most of the wedding day, with the exception maybe of that moment, I'm typically just on single shot to attempt to make myself shoot less images, which clearly did not work at all on this wedding day. At the time of recording this, so I loaded a lot of my wedding workflow is that I take a lot of images. I will call them. I will usually do either, I'll sometimes use an AI call. I would love it if I could just select like, hey, only family photos, do the AI call, tell me what eyes are open, what is a shot I need. The rest of the wedding day, I find that I'm just as fast to go through and make my selects as it would to just load everything in. Obviously, it's more present time that I'm just kind of there actually making the selects. But I would say it's kind of a time zero at the end of it. And I think that when I do the entire cull myself, I think it's a stronger cull. So I've been doing that, and I've been doing that the night of the wedding. Or even in the wedding that I shot with the Z8, I actually did it over dinner as well. I downloaded my card, started just culling there, got through pretty much up to the reception, got home, spent 15 more minutes kind of culling through the rest, and it was done. So that's part one of my workflow. I do that in photo mechanics still. Then the second part of my workflow is moving into Lightroom because I just have so many images. And at the time of recording this, I'm hoping that this changes maybe within the next day or two. So I'm hoping by the time you listen to this, maybe it's all good. But the Lightroom profile for the Z8, the higher ISO images, it just does a real bad job of it right now. It introduces way more grain than it should. And if you load it into Nikon Capture NX, their Nikon software, the files look amazing. But workflow wise, it's just not what I want. So I had to run some noise reduction on my images because the Adobe profile isn't good yet. So I'm hoping that that gets updated because I'm certain that they're aware of it. And I'm hoping that that happens really, really quickly because these cameras started shipping last week. Next up, DX mode. So this camera, or at least the camera that I got, came, so I used to set this up. So I don't know if maybe other people did this or maybe I accidentally caused a change in the Nikon ecosystem. So whatever the function button is that goes under your ring finger, so when you're holding the camera or the one that's under your ring finger, they've changed that to be FX and DX mode, so full frame to crop mode. And I use that all the time. So I'm basically just doing in-camera cropping to save myself cropping in post-production because I will use AI, I use Imagine to edit my images. And if I can get pretty much the crop that I want correct in camera, I don't have to do anything later. So after the wedding day, I don't have to do anything at all in terms of cropping. I would say maybe I crop 3 images on a wedding day, and Imagine does straightening as well, which is maybe check out Imagine.com/ I'll put a link in the description. You can get 1,500 free edits. And I would use them if only for the straightening tool. So even if they didn't do any editing and they only did straightening, I would be happy to use it for that specific thing because I always shoot at kind of this like 1 degree slant, especially for family photos. And that just erases that for me, which is really cool. So technically that is cropping because it's changing the frame and it's straightening, but I don't crop a whole lot of my photos. I do it correctly as well as I can in camera, and having that quickly accessible to me on that function button, I'm very, very, very happy with it. Now, there is one downside if you're a video shooter, so I've kind of spoken all to photography. For video, this camera is incredibly overpowered. I will never use most of the features and most of the things that it allows me to do. The downside is that it will only record to 1 card, again, at the time of recording this. So it'll record to one of the cards, but it will not do instantaneous backup and write to both cards. I don't know if it's a heating problem or if it's just the way that the camera works. But the Z9 is the same way as well, which is a bit of a bummer. So I'm hoping that that could be a firmware thing that gets addressed eventually because I know through comments that it's a big thing for a lot of people. And I'm hoping that that gets resolved because that is one of the, I would say, at least for me, one of the biggest barriers in recommending this as like the absolute best hybrid camera for any system at all. So hopefully that gets resolved, but we will all see together. If you're interested in more of my thoughts on the Nikon Z8, head on over to YouTube because there are a lot of them. There's 3 videos. There's one that's just 15 minutes of kind of the screen being recorded at a wedding day. So it'll show you the autofocus performance. Again, I'm going to caveat with the fact that when you're watching it 4K on a big monitor, that the little box bouncing around seems pretty erratic, but doesn't really feel like that in real life. I also have a more in-depth behind the scenes that talks a little bit about the process of photographing a wedding with Nikon Z8. And then I also have the pre-production review. And a lot of these are heavily focused as well on the Nikon 85 f1.2, which is a lens that I love. So that's all. Any questions, drop them in one of those YouTube videos and I will get back to you. If you're interested in coming to Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, CanadaPhotoSummit.ca, link in the description below. We'd love to see you. John Branch, Lindsay Coulter, Sam Hurd, Nova Marquina, myself, Christine Tremolay, and Eric Floberg. So come on through, learn about some wedding photography, hang out. That's all I have to say for you today. The Nikon Z8. See you next time.